Hey everyone! So in this video, I'm going to be talking about printing photos. Now this is just going to be a really quick overview of the whole process, and then I'm going to have other videos to kind of explain some of the some details about some of these things, such as installing ICC profiles. You don't even know what that means yet, but you will soon. And then you guys are actually going to get to print your own photos. So this is really setting you up to help you with your final printing portfolio, so pay attention. Alright guys, let's get to it. Okay. So first off, let's talk about printing papers a bit. The paper that you print on can really help, or it can kind of take away from your photos. So you really want to make sure that you're choosing papers that are going to work well for the specific subject of your specific image. Now there's a huge variety out there. We have so many different types of papers, so it's really fun to experiment with this. Now, in general, photo papers are described by how shiny they are or are not. So an example of a shiny paper would be like gloss, high gloss metallic, while other papers, usually like art papers or matte papers, have pretty much no shine to them at all, no gloss or anything like that. They're also described by what they feel like, whether they're smooth or textured, and their tone, as in kind of like how we talked about with white balance, where you have yellow to blue tones. The same goes with papers. There's cool toned or bluish toned paper, and there's also warm toned or yellowish toned paper. So for our class, we're mainly going to be using luster paper. Now, luster has a slight texture, and it's not matte, but it's not glossy. It's kind of right in the middle, and it's actually preferred for portraits. So now some of the other preferences would be like glossy paper is good for objects and advertisements, things that are kind of like gritty looking, because gloss really emphasizes those little details. Now, matte paper is usually preferred by fine art photographers, especially like landscape photographers and such. And there's also things that are similar to like watercolor paper that have a more artsy type of feel. And like I've already mentioned earlier, some types of paper are metallic, they're super shiny, and they usually have a little bit of a gray look to the paper. So it's something to think about for, you know, if you have your brightest areas in the image aren't actually going to be as bright because they're on that gray instead of a white paper, but the metallicness kind of makes up for it. We also have things like rag, which is very, very matte, and usually has a warm tone, transparencies that can be attached to other images, so doing like kind of like an overlay. It can be really fun to get artsy with that. You can actually add those to light boxes. And then there's also things like canvas that we can print on, and that usually has a really extreme texture with a matte finish, although I have heard of some kind of metallic canvas. I haven't experimented with that yet, but I would really like to, because that sounds interesting. Okay, so now let's start talking a bit about resolution. Okay, so for your resolution, well, first of all, let's talk about what resolution is. You should have covered this already in the beginning Photoshop class, but let's do a quick reminder. So resolution refers to how many pixels are in your image, and a pixel is a square of solid color, and it's what makes up digital photos. So the more pixels you have, the smoother the transitions are between the different colors. Now, if you crop your image, you're actually cropping out pixels, so that's something really important to think about. If you're going to be printing, you want to make sure you have enough resolution. Let's see, so some general guidelines for resolution. Now, for online, for screens, we don't need as much resolution, and that's why a photo might look great on your phone or on a website, but if you try to print it, it doesn't look that great. It's because we only need 72 to 96 pixels per inch for an image to look good on a screen. Now, what do I mean by pixels per inch? That means for every inch, there's going to be 96 little squares, okay? So, you know, that might seem like a lot, but when it comes to printing, we actually want 240 to 300 pixels per inch. Any higher, there's not really a noticeable difference, but yeah, for printing 240 to 300. So you could do some math to figure out how big of a print you can do from an image. So for example, a 4x6 inch print, you'd want your image to be 1200 by 1800 pixels. And I got there by multiplying 4 for my 4 inches times 300 pixels, and that's 1200 pixels. If I multiply 6 by 300, that's 1800. So I have 1200 by 1800 pixels. So let's say, let me bring up the calculator. I wanted to see how big I could print straight from my camera. So I know that my photo files coming from my Sony are 4000 by 6000 pixels. So that means I just take 6000 and divide that by 300. So I want 300 pixels per inch. And that's going to give me 20 inches. And then if I go ahead and take 4000, which is the other side, and divide that by 300, I get 13.33. So straight from my camera, I can print 20 by 13.33 inches. Now, again, I did say that we can do down to 240 pixels. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So let me take my 6000 and divide that by 240, and that's going to give me 25 inches. Sweet. And now let's go 4000 divided by 240 equals 16 inches. So if I wanted to do a 16 by 20, I would need to go ahead and do 240 pixels per inch, and then I would have to crop off 0.66 from one side and 5 inches from another to get to 16 by 20. Okay, so I know we have a little bit of math here, but it's not that difficult. You just got to take your total amount of pixels for a side and divide it by how many pixels you want per inch to figure out how many inches you could actually print that from. Okay, now there are some online printing services where you can go down to 150 ppi, and it also just depends on what you're printing on. For instance, canvas prints, because there's all that texture, sometimes you don't need as much. But usually to get the most results, it is going to be 240 to 300 pixels per inch. The best way to know what to use if you're using like a service, a website or something, is to go to their FAQ section, their frequently asked questions section, and see, they usually have something in there that gives you information on the resolution, the file type, the color space, all those different things. So whichever company you decide to use, make sure you check with them. And if they don't have that information, like anywhere on their website, I'd be a little suspect. I would think, I don't know if they are professional enough to actually handle my professional prints. And that's kind of what starts setting photo printers apart. You know, some people are like, oh, I'll just go to CVS, but they are just someone hitting print in the back. They're not taking the time to actually make sure that your print is going to come out beautifully. So anyways, continuing on. So let's talk about saving your PSD files. Now, when you go to File Save, your file extension is .psd, you know this, and this keeps all of your layers. So when you create a new Photoshop file, when I'm first working on an image, what I usually like to do is do my last name, my first name, whatever the project name is, or the image name, the title it's going to be, and then I put underscore working. Some people use underscore master, and this basically tells you that this is going to be your PSD file that has all of your layers in it, so that when you need to go back and make major edits, you can go back to that file. Now, if you want to save your file for online sharing, you usually want to save it as a JPEG. So for this case, you wouldn't save over your working file. Instead, you would go to File, Save As, and add web to the file name instead of working or master. So you're basically making a copy of that file, because we're going to be changing the resolution, the color space, so it'll look the best online, and you don't want to save over your working or your master file. Okay, so after you do that, you want to go ahead and convert to profile. You go to Edit, Convert to Profile, and choose sRGB as the color profile. Now, if you remember, sRGB is what's pretty much universally used on all screens. So you want to make sure that you're doing sRGB. If you don't convert, if you're like an Adobe RGB 1998 or ProPhoto, then your colors aren't going to look quite right when you post it to like social media or something. So you want to make sure you take this step. And if you do post your photo to social media and you're like, oh man, why does it look so weird? Go back and check to see if you forgot to change, if you forgot to convert to profile. Now, something to know is that when you do this, this will flatten your layers, and this is why we don't do it on our working file. Okay, you want to have a new file for this. Next, you're going to go to image size to resize. And so, if you remembered from just a few minutes ago, I said for online, 72 to 96 pixels per inch usually works. I personally like to use 100 just because it makes for easy math. If I have to do some quick math, 100 is a lot easier to divide and such than 72 and 96. Okay, now let's see. Then you want to go ahead and enter the pixel dimensions for whatever size you need. So at the time I'm recording this video, 600 to 1,000 pixels is usually pretty good for Facebook/Instagram. So just some general guidelines. Each website, if you're working on a website and have a template going on or something, they're each going to have their own different dimensions. So this is when you start to enter in dimensions to see what's going to work for that. Alright, so whatever you choose is fine. Then you go to File, Save. Now, this has just made another PSD. This is your web PSD now, where you've changed the resolution and the color space, but we still need to save it as a JPEG. So this time we're going to go to File, Save a Copy. So this was something that was recently changed. You used to be able to do Save As and go to JPEG, but at least on my version, for some reason, you can't do that anymore. I don't know why they changed it, but they did. But if you go to Save a Copy, you can change the file format to JPEG. Now, note that saving as a JPEG compresses the file. It compresses it down so it's a smaller file size, but it also is throwing out information. But you won't have your layers anymore. And something that's really important to know, that if you are going to print, you do not want to do heavy compression. So when you go to save a JPEG, once you hit save, you change the name or whatever, and then you go to save it. Another box is going to pop up that has some JPEG saving options, and there's usually a slider on there with the quality of the save. That's also the quality of the compression. So if you go all the way down to 1, yes, you're going to have a much smaller file size, but it's kicking out a whole lot of information to make that file size. So sometimes that's necessary. If you're working on a specific site, a specific social media site, maybe your own website, something like that, it might tell you, hey, for this specific place, we can only take an image that's 150 by 150 pixels or under a megabyte or something like that. So then you would need to go ahead and do that. But if you're printing, you don't want to compress it. If you compress it, the print's not going to look that great. You're going to start getting what's called JPEG artifacts, or these weird, I'll have to find an image to show you guys, but these weird little, I don't know, there's parts of the image that just start looking funky. So yeah, if you're going to print, if this is going to be a JPEG for printing, don't compress. I'm going to get more into that in a minute, but I just wanted to tell you that now. All right. And for this last save as your JPEG, I suggest renaming the file for what it'll be used for. So, for example, if you're going to be posting it to Facebook, another thing would be like, okay, if you've ever noticed at the top of your web browser when you're on a website, there's like a really small little square that kind of tells you what website you're on. So if you're like a city college website, there's the FCC logo. Well, you can usually do that with like your own website too. So if I wanted to use the same image for my Facebook profile photo and for that, a favicon is what it's called, then I would save one as my Facebook JPEG, and then I would save a whole nother file with a different resolution for my favicon. Okay, so this helps you in the future if you need to pull something up for something else. You can go ahead and do it quickly and easily just by looking at the names and not having to open every file or whatever. Okay, so we're going to be, I'm going to do a whole another video on actually creating your print file, but just some quick information is that when you print a file, you usually want an uncompressed file, so you have all of that beautiful information and your photo comes out great. In this case, you'd want to do a JPEG with no compression, or a TIFF file. Now, TIFF files have no compression at all. The only issue with them is that they are very large file sizes. So again, that's where it depends on the printer you're going to specifically. What do they recommend? What files do they take? Is there a limit with their uploader on the file size? All of these things become a factor when it comes to sending your files into print. So in some cases, the TIFF file may be too big, and you would want to instead save it as a JPEG with no compression, especially if you're going through, a print service. Like I said, here's a couple different ones around. Horn Photo is a local one. Great service there, and some online ones. I personally like WHCC, White House Custom Color. They do a really great job. When you first sign up with them, at least they used to when I first signed up for them, you could submit 5 files and they would print them for you and send them to you for free, just so you can see if the color that you're getting from the print is matching up with the color that's on your monitor. So that's a sign right there that this is a printing lab that actually cares if their customers' prints are coming out great or not. That's one of the big differences between going through a printer that's specifically for photographers versus a printer for the general public, as in, like a drugstore or something like that, right? So anyways, all right, in the next video, we're going to be talking a bit more about creating a print file.